So Vijay, I'll start with you on this one. Do you have any concerns, or how would you answer someone who's new to Bitcoin, comes onto the Clubhouse stage and says, hey, look, there's just a few pools, and if you combine two of them, it's over 50% of the hash rate, and there's really only one or two major producers of ASIC machines, and that's a potential security flaw?
Well, it's absolutely a legitimate concern. I think with mining pools, the first argument is that a mining pool doesn't necessarily control the hash power; it directs the hash power, and anyone who commits their hash power to a mining pool can always pull that hash power and send it to another mining pool or mine themselves. And you would believe that people who are mining have an economic incentive to want the Bitcoin network to succeed because they're being rewarded in Bitcoins. So, one argument is that the concentration of hash power in mining pools is a little bit misleading as a measure of centralization. And there's also been some development by Matt Corallo on helping to relieve this problem with better hash. I don't know the exact details, but sort of giving more power back to the individual miners who are participating in pools rather than the pool operators themselves. The other thing I would say is that Satoshi Nakamoto anticipated this threat from the very beginning, and he talks about this in the white paper, where he talks about if there was an attacker who managed to accumulate 51% of the hash power, the protocol is designed in such a way that they have a greater incentive to just mine coins rather than to double spend, because the cost of double spending is quite high and it's fraught with risk. Even if you have 51% of the hash power, you're not guaranteed to succeed in mining every single block. And so you have to expend a great deal of energy to try and steal back a payment when you can just mine the coins, which are valuable in and of themselves. Now, that's the economic argument that Satoshi Nakamoto gave, and his argument was actually kind of deductive rather than inductive. So it wasn't really based on any evidence, because he wrote this before the Bitcoin network was even created. But since then, people have actually looked at the empirical evidence, and there was a recent study which showed that in periods where there was hash power concentration in a few pools, there was no double spend attacks. Even in cases where there was a potential to execute these double spend attacks, there weren't any double spend attacks. And I have a quote here that I'll just quickly read to you from this paper. It says, "We conclude that the historically observed mining pool concentration does not indicate a higher risk of double spending attacks. Hence, our result directly contradicts the common belief that concentration is harmful. This result demonstrates the well-known economic insight that feasibility does not imply desirability." So sort of both deductively and inductively, we come to believe that double spending attacks are very rare. People who have the power to do that, execute them, don't have the incentive to do that. And we've actually seen this over the history of Bitcoin. The thing that really I think is a greater risk to Bitcoin is not an economic attack. A double spend attack is an economic attack. The greater risk, in my view, is a political attack on mining, because nation states often act in economically irrational ways to further their political ends. And classic example of this is warfare. When a company declares war on its neighbor, it's usually not for economic reasons. It's because of some political end. And you could imagine that a nation state decides that Bitcoin's existence is a threat to them. Like they don't want to allow their citizenry to avail themselves of the ability to save and transact outside the state's jurisdiction. Or potentially a nation state could say this is a threat to our control of our monetary policy, and they may want to attack Bitcoin mining for that reason. And of all the nation states with a desire to attack Bitcoin mining, the Chinese state is the one with by far the greatest capability, because of the concentration of expertise and companies with the ability to manufacture these chips, and also because there are so many mining pools in China, and mining facilities in China, because they've had this long history of overbuilding energy production, and so miners tend to go to China where the electricity is incredibly cheap. Sichuan province is an example of this. So the Chinese state has the potential more than any other state to attack Bitcoin mining, and you could imagine potentially that they appropriate these manufacturing companies, and they nationalize these mining operations, and then they have the power to potentially censor transactions on the Bitcoin network, or just pull that hash power away from the Bitcoin network, which would dramatically decrease security in Bitcoin and potentially reduce confidence in Bitcoin. Now, there is a nuclear option that I haven't seen many people talk about, but I think is a really important thing to think about. And the nuclear option is changing the proof of work function. So Bitcoin's proof of work function is SHA-256, and all of these companies that are developing these ASIC chips, very, very specialized chips to do one thing, which is run SHA-256 extremely efficiently. So do as many SHA-256 hashes per second as possible. If Bitcoin's proof of work function were to change, all of that capital expenditure, all of those computers, all those ASICs would be rendered obsolete instantly. Now, this would be a very, very contentious thing to do this. You would need to get a huge consensus from participants in the network and investors. And I don't think something like this could ever happen except under gravest extreme. But the existence of this nuclear option, I think, is enough of a check that any nation state attempting an attack would have to consider the fact that all of this hardware that they're appropriating could be made worthless instantly if the Bitcoin network switched from, for example, SHA-256 to SHA-512. So that's the biggest concern I have, is a nation state attack. But I do think there is the potential of this nuclear option, as messy as it would be, getting everyone to sort of switch the proof of work function at once would be incredibly difficult. There'd be a lot of infighting. All the honest miners would oppose it, even if the network was being attacked by the Chinese state controlling the dishonest miners. So you'd have a bunch of people who were legitimate, honest participants on the network opposing this, but it is an option that could be used in case of an extreme situation like a nation-state attack against Bitcoin mining.
Lyn, a lot there. Anything that you would like to add on or react to in this thought of mining pool centralization, hardware production centralization, nation-state attack on mining pools, for instance?
I think he summarized it very well, and I agree that the nation-state angle is the one to think about, because as you've seen in an economic sense, the incentive structure works very well. And so basically, the main risk to watch out for is ones that are not acting economically. And so I kind of talked about how people, I think, overstate sometimes the risk of having the mining capacity that exists in China. Because as Vijay pointed out, the mining pools, you basically, miners can pull their hash power away and basically move away from that. We actually saw some of that happen years ago when a mining pool got close to 50%, and they started getting criticized for it, and they basically, miners just kind of spread themselves out again. And so overall, I do think that the one of the later tests for Bitcoin is its ability to develop a fee market and to resist the potential for nation state attacks, which are not necessarily separate risks. Because as you get deeper into the 2020s, if Bitcoin does not have a sufficient, if it's got a pretty small percentage of its market capitalization spent on security, it becomes a little bit more vulnerable to those sorts of tail risks from actors that are not necessarily economic. Whereas if it has developed a pretty persistent fee market, it makes it a lot more costly and a much bigger operation to even attempt it.